as well. Congratulations on your assignment 2 results. Very impressive analyses, very well researched, great content. Well done, guys. I'm very proud of you. All the best going into the exams. So we're just covering the last few learning units to prepare you for your final summative exam. All right, so tonight we'll be covering market structures and perfect competition. Okay, so we're going to be doing the economic theory and analysis. The learning objectives for this learning unit are to be able to summarize, then characterize the different market structures. You have to be able to list the conditions which have to be met for perfect competition to exist. You've got to be able to draw a demand curve for a product of a firm under perfect competition conditions. You have to be able to explain the short-run equilibrium condition for a perfectly competitive firm. Identify a given diagram, whether a firm is making an economic profit, a normal profit, or an economic loss. And you'll have to explain the supply curve of the firm and the market supply, as well as be able to simply define market competition, explain demand firms or demand curves facing these firms under perfect market conditions, be able to draw marginal and average cost curves for a firm, and explain why profits are maximized only on the rising part of the marginal cost curve. You'll understand this a little bit more once we get there. And then, of course, you'll have to be able to illustrate, in other words, be able to draw your diagrams with different profit conditions for a firm, an equilibrium in the short run. So describe the long run equilibrium of the firm and the industry in perfect market conditions. Okay, so learning objective 1. We've got characteristics of these different market structures. So a perfect competition has many small firms. All right, they offer a homogeneous product. There's no competitive advantage in the product. There are no barriers to entry or exit, and everyone in the market is a price taker. No one firm or party has control over the market. Perfect example would be the JSE agricultural futures. So in agriculture, it's because there are so many tiny little farms that are selling all of their products, they sell futures. So they sell the harvest before they actually harvest, okay? But that is a homogeneous product, when not so much concerned with all the quality is obviously pre-graded, so they are homogeneous products entering the market. You are simply competing on price, and everyone is a price taker. In a monopolistic competition, there are many different firms. There are differentiated products. There are low barriers to entry, and there are some price controls. Okay, so typical examples in South Africa would be these independent retailers. So these smaller, independent, customer-facing businesses. An oligopoly, that's sort of like the telecommunications industry in South Africa. There are a few large firms that dominate. It's standardized and slightly differentiated product, but they're mostly standardized. You can compare contracts across different service providers. But the products are differentiated enough, they offer different phone contracts, different top-up offerings, different, minor tweaks to like data contracts, etc. And that offers significant barriers to entry because obviously they have all the infrastructure, they control all of it between these two very powerful companies. Then you have a monopoly. Okay, Eskom is always our perfect example for a monopoly. It is a single firm. They offer a unique product in South Africa. We only have one firm that offers us electricity. There are no substitutes, and there are extremely high barriers to entry. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at each in a little bit more detail. Okay, understanding the theoretical ideal market structure. So, the definition of perfect competition is a market structure with numerous small firms producing identical products where no individual firm can influence the market price. So, if in the exams you were asked for a definition, that is it. Okay, so the South African agricultural market, if they're trading maize, wheat, sunflower, futures, there are standardized contracts and it's transparent pricing. Anybody can buy from anyone. There are many buyers and sellers, and everyone is a price taker. Just an interesting fact, the grain sector in South Africa contributes about 30% to our total agricultural product, but it only represents about 2.8% of our GDP. Obviously, our biggest contributor would be our mining sector. Then we have our closely followed by our services sector. That's what makes us, because we have a very powerful service industry, that is what makes us more of a first world economy. That's why we have this dual economy features. So key conceptual aspects, price takers, everyone, including all of the farmers, all of the products are homogeneous. There are standardized grains, standardized graded agricultural products. The firms earn normal profits in the long run. Okay, there is no excessive products to be made in this sector. Resource allocation is extremely efficient. Why? Because there are so many competitors in this market. If you don't produce efficiently, you'll get priced out of the market. Okay, so this is important because it is a benchmark for market efficiency. Surplus maximization for consumers and producers. If there is a surplus, it can be utilized within this market naturally. It contrasts with South Africa's concentrated retail sector. So our retail sector is dominated by a few key big actors. And it explains price formation in commodity markets because we are still a predominantly commodity driven market, especially with regards to our exports. Okay, so the Competition Commission examines agricultural markets for competitiveness, as many show perfect competition traits, but face challenges from concentrated retail sectors. The essential requirements that define this market structure are a large number of buyers and sellers. There are over 200 participants trading maize contracts in the South African agricultural futures market. All homogeneous products. So you are not buying the actual wheat, you are buying a contract. Okay, so the contract itself is a homogeneous product. That's why the stock market and specific areas of it are the perfect market. Okay, they are a perfect example. Perfect information. The idea is that everyone has real-time price information of all the agricultural future contracts. Okay, so all market participants have complete knowledge of all the prices and market conditions immediately. There is freedom to enter and exit the markets. There are 150,000 nationwide spaza shops. There are minimal requirements to entry or exit. Everyone is a price taker. Firms must accept the price, they cannot individually influence it. So sunflower farmers accept a JSE price of 9,273 per ton. That is every South African like small scale sunflower farmer will accept that price. And then, of course, you need perfect mobility of resources. Okay, so you'll see that there are slight differences between the characteristics of a perfect condition, a perfect market, and the conditions for a perfect market. Okay, so the last one is that we need perfect mobility, and of course, perfect information is the other one we've added. So there are factors of production that can move freely between users without any restrictions. So in KwaZulu-Natal, switching between maize, wheat, and sunflower is something that farmers typically do, and they do that based on pricing. So the demand curve facing these firms. So this helps us understand why all of these firms in this perfectly competitive market are price takers. So, in a perfect competitive market, the demand curve facing an individual firm is perfectly horizontally elastic. Okay, so what does that mean? All the firms are price takers, they have to accept the prevailing market price. If a firm does raise their price above this market price, they lose all of their customers. Okay, so there is an infinite change in quantity given a change in price. So for the firm, price equals your average revenue, which equals your marginal revenue. Okay, at this point. So a perfect example, again, let's go back to our agricultural market. Individual maize traders cannot influence the price. So maize farmers accept whatever the futures price is provided by the market. There are over 2.5 million standardized maize contracts that were traded just this year. So this horizontal line shows you that the trader can sell any quantity at this price, but they cannot influence the individual price. The demand curve under this perfect competition. So here we illustrate the perfect elastic demand curve facing this firm with a perfect competition. So the key features of the firm facing this market environment is that you will have a perfectly elastic horizontal demand curve for an individual firm. So like we see that flat line, what it represents is that any shift in price will cause an infinite change in quantity. They will lose all of their customers. The firm is again a price taker of the market price. They have unlimited sales. They can sell any quantity they want at the given market price. They have no market power. So the mathematical expression is that the demand um, remains constant. The price remains constant regardless of the quantity that is sold by any individual firm. So now we're going to look at marginal and average cost curves. Okay, we're going to stick with our South African agricultural market example. So here we have marginal costs in our South Africa context. So the additional cost to produce one more ton of maize is influenced by the South African input costs. So how much do the seeds, fertilizer, water cost? What is the farm labor? Okay, laboring costs. So here we're looking at input costs of material, and here we've got labor costs as well. So minimum wage rate in South Africa is 23 Rand and 19 cents per hour. Okay, the diesel price fluctuates, also impacts the marginal cost curve. Water scarcity again pushes up the cost. Why? Because we've had droughts, therefore our biggest crop, which is maize, 30% of our agricultural product is quite heavy on water, and now we have water scarcity. Okay, so the South African cost examples. So in the Western Cape, wheat costs between 15 Rand and, 12 and 15 Rand per kg. Sunflower oil, 9,273 Rand per ton. Small versus commercial farms, there are different average variable costs. So in other words, they each have different conditions that they are like that they are subject to. So the more commercial farms are influenced to a lesser extent by things like farm labor because they already employ a significant number of people. Although if the minimum wage were to increase, it would obviously devastate them much more than a smaller farm. They have different average variable costs. If you're a small farm and you have to increase production, it's much harder for you to find or create new supply chains that will provide you with that additional materials. Electricity costs have gone up by like nearly 19%, also shifting your marginal cost curves. Transport costs have increased due to the increase in diesel and petrol costs from rural areas. So South African agriculture market employs 5 to 6% of the entire workforce, and they deliver 2.8% of GDP. Interest rates are another thing that impact this market. So we have the repo rate. It's at 7% at the moment, and that affects farm financing. Higher rates shift your average total costs. Okay, they shift it upwards. Why? Because now your fixed costs have increased on average. There were rate cuts in July, so your fixed costs will come down temporarily. There are credit costs determine the expansion decisions. So if capital is cheaper, then you are far more likely to take or to spend more money investing in more capital, which means you can expand faster. The rates affect land prices and future investments. So typically, the South African Reserve Bank targets between 3 and 6% inflation for different policy decisions. Now, the market structure impact. Now, because the JSE futures has created this price taking conditions. So there is export parity in pricing that sets the revenue. So everybody is exporting at the same price levels so that there is no competitive advantage given to any, specific farm. The most farmers are price takers because there are over 10,000 producers. They have oligopolistic, input suppliers that affect costs. Okay, so like I said, fertilizer and seeds now become a problem if you're a small versus a commercial farmer. There are exchange rates which impact imports. So if we import organic fertilizer, which is a requirement for certain markets, then we are drastically impacted by exchange rates, which are impacted by again by interest rates. And other countries and other retailers in South Africa can purchase these futures on maize, wheat, and sunflowers. Now we're going to look at these 3 different cost curves. Okay, we did cover it in the last lecture, so if you guys want to just revise that, I am going to just summarize and explain very quickly the difference between these 3 different costs. So marginal cost curve, marginal of course implies the one additional unit. So what did one additional unit cost us? The average cost is our total costs divided by the number of units that we produced. So you can see on our x-axis we have quantity and on our y-axis we have cost. The average total cost is the average total cost incorporates the fixed costs as well. Okay, so now we have the intersection. So our key relationships, you've got your marginal cost intersection, which is your marginal cost curve passes through the minimum point of your average cost curve. Okay, so if you can see here, if we refer back to the graph, in blue, the blue line, you have your marginal cost curve. You'll see that it initially starts higher than your average costs. Okay, so your average costs are what it costs you to produce. So it is your variable costs. Okay, so in order to Yes, it is your variable cost. So it should be average variable cost or average cost. I suppose you can leave out the V. Sorry, I just need to make sure that was correct. So here we have, this is your cost of materials and labor essentially. And here in red, you have your average variable cost, so your average cost. So here where you're producing no units, you have an average cost of 15, you have a marginal cost of 20, and you have an average total cost of 25. Now, what this all implies that with the U shape is that all of your cost curves have diminishing returns. So as you increase your quantity produced, they initially decrease the the cost of spread out across each product that you produce. However, as you reach a certain level, you have now optimized your production. Therefore, if you start adding additional quantity, your costs start rising again. So you want when your marginal cost is below your average cost, then your average cost is falling. Okay, but when your marginal cost is greater than your average cost, then your average costs are rising. How is this significant? We need to know what the optimal level of production is for every firm. We need to know the short run production decisions and what they were based on, and the relationship between production volumes and these costs. This also tells us when the ideal time is to enter or exit the market. So we have the short run equilibrium conditions. This is about understanding the profit maximization. Again, we're going to use some examples from our agricultural market. So in our perfect competition, a firm maximizes profit in the short run by producing at a point where marginal costs equal marginal revenue, which equals price. Now, marginal revenue is simply the revenue we receive from selling one additional unit. What is that? Obviously, the price at which we sold it. Okay, and we optimize that ratio, that relationship, when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the cost of producing one additional unit equals the cost or the price at which we sell that unit. Okay, so again, JSC farmers are price takers, which means that their price is already equal to their marginal revenue. Wheat farmers produce until their marginal revenue equals their marginal costs. So when their input costs equal the market price, production stops. During a drought, farmers may also temporarily halt production. Why? Because now your marginal costs are starting to exceed your marginal revenue. So production halts. Okay, so the key matrix decision is when your price exceeds your average total cost. So that is a point where you are making a reasonable profit. You have optimized your production levels because your marginal cost equals your marginal revenue. This is where Eastern Cape sunflower farms are currently situated. Okay, then we've got a situation with your Mpumalanga maize producers, okay, they're working into a point where they have their price, which equals their average total costs at the same price, at the same level. Okay, then you've got your Free State farmers. During a drought, their price may drop versus their average variable costs. So now your marginal costs are starting to exceed your marginal revenue. And in KZN, where wheat growing is quite challenging, there your average variable cost may be lower than your price, but which is also lower than your average total cost. Okay, so if they struggle, if it's a challenging issue, they are put in a situation where they could be making losses and eventually they just stop production. Profit maximization on a rising marginal cost curve. Okay, so here we have two conditions. The first is profit maximization occurs when marginal cost equals marginal revenue. This is necessary, but it is not a sufficient condition. So it can and must occur on the rising portion of the marginal cost curve. Okay, so that means that we must produce at an optimal scale where your marginal cost equals the market price. The second order condition. For maximum profit, the slope of your marginal cost must be greater than your slope of your marginal revenue. So in a perfect competition, your marginal revenue is your price and it's a horizontal line. So the slope is 0. Therefore, your marginal cost must have a positive slope. It must be rising. So in the Western Cape, wheat farmers face rising cost per ton after their optimal level of production is reached. Okay. So what does this mean? When marginal cost is lower than your marginal revenue, farmers need to increase production. And when marginal cost is greater than your marginal revenue, they need to start reducing production. Okay, so rising marginal costs reflects a diminishing returns in agriculture. So what that has meant is that after the fall, now in order to produce beyond our current optimal levels, we have to employ additional labor. But until that person is very efficient, also we haven't increased our capital, which means that we've now created a situation of potentially overcrowding. So we start facing rising costs without a comparative rise in revenue. So the input costs increase per unit yield as your production expands. So the Reserve Bank also has an impact here. 7% impacts farming costs, which also shifts your marginal cost curve upwards. Okay, so identifying profit conditions from these diagrams. Okay, so when analyzing a perfectly competitive firm, we have to determine the perfect condition by examining these 4 things. Okay, the market price, the average variable cost, the average total cost, and the marginal cost. Okay, again, do you remember our 3 forms of profit? Okay, so obviously there is economic profit. This is where we consider all of the opportunity costs. There are normal profits. In the long run, this is what you want to achieve. You have normal profits, not excessive levels of profits, and you do not want to be making an economic loss. Okay. So 50%, 57% of the South African sectors showed no increase in market concentration, according to the Competition Commission. So we are not cannibalizing, ourselves within our own sectors. So with economic profit, this is when your price exceeds your average total costs. So your firm earns more than your normal profit. So the rectangle between your price and your average total cost is just total profits. Okay, when you're receiving these excessive level of profits, you attract new people into your market. So when we saw an export boom in the market for apples, we attracted a whole lot of new farmers into that market. Okay, because the JSE futures, they were charging 3,800 per ton. Okay, then we have your normal profit levels. Okay, so the perfect example are your spaza shops. They're about 178, they're worth about 178 billion in the informal market. Okay, but your price equals your average total cost. The firm covers all your economic costs. There is 0 economic profit. okay, which means you're not making any excessive profits, and you have a long run equilibrium position. In the long run, normal profits are what you aim to make. What you don't want to make is an economic loss. Okay, so in 2022 to 2023, there was a drought in South Africa. It increased the price of water, and scarcity of water became a problem. So there was a 30% increase in the cost of wheat. That was also incorporated into your assignment. Okay, this was a real life event that did occur. So at this point, the price was below the average total cost. So the firm is simply now failing to cover all of the costs. So in the short run, you can have a situation where your price exceeds your average variable cost, so you can continue to run like that. But if your price drops below your average variable cost, it's best to just shut down because you're only generating more and more losses. Okay, so here we have these three diagrams, which illustrate forgive me. Here we have the three diagrams that illustrate these three profit scenarios, okay, specifically for firms in a perfect competition environment. So here we have a situation where your price exceeds your average total costs. This will be your shaded area is your total profits. Okay, so you can see there you're earning additional profits from the point that your marginal cost curves are rising and your marginal revenue curve is also rising, and your price is set well above the market price. Okay, so these are all excessive profits. You will attract new entrants into your market. This is what your normal profit curve looks like. This is your price, and this is your average total curve running down here, as well as your marginal cost curve here in red. Okay, so here again, you can see that the reverse from the economic profit occurs here in the economic loss section. This red rectangle representing your total loss. This happens when your price dips below your average total costs. Okay, so you can see the green figure here. Okay, instead of touching the price, it has in fact bounced before touching the market price. Therefore, all of this cost is now carried by the firm, highlighted by the rectangle. And then you can see there's a gap, a break in the marginal costs, because at this point it's very difficult for the firm to continue to produce. Okay. So we have the supply curve of the market and the firm in general. So here we can look at the opposite side of the coin. So far we've been looking at the demand side. Now, in order to get a full holistic picture, we have to look specifically at the supply side. So in this scenario, we're taking on the stance of the producer. Okay, so the firm's supply curve, how much should we supply? That is derived from the marginal cost curve. So only the portion of the marginal cost curve that falls above the average variable cost represents the quantity that should be aimed at. Okay, so it represents the quantity supplied at each price level. It is upward sloping due to the diminishing returns. So at a point where the price is below your average variable cost, remember average variable costs are things like your materials and your labor. Those are things that increase as you produce more, whereas your average fixed costs do not increase over time. Fixed costs are simply spread out amongst the number of units you produce. So the firm needs to shut down if the price dips below that variable cost. at least in the short run. So these small scale farms in the Free State, that's how they had to respond when the futures prices dropped to 3,600 per ton. Okay. So the market supply curve, there is a horizontal summation when you put all the firms' supply curves together. Okay, so individually, they face these more elastic market conditions, but when you put them all together, what you end up with is a horizontal line. So it shows that the total quantity is supplied at each price level. It is more elastic than the individual firm's supply, obviously. Okay, so there are shifts with the entry and exit of different firms within the industry. So the South African agricultural derivatives market showed a combined supply of 4.3 million tons of maize is traded annually. So overall, we look at the total supply that is provided to the market and the price that it can be absorbed into the market. Okay, so just some interesting facts about South Africa. According to the Competition Commission, 71% of South African sectors have highly concentrated markets. So the agricultural futures market, which comprises of maize, wheat, sunflower, those are the things that you can buy ahead of them actually being produced. Okay, so the yield is more predictable. They show near perfect competition. So there are typically small scale farmers, it's about 1.2 million households, but only 10% of them are in the formal markets. So the JSE agricultural derivatives, they are the most liquid agricultural futures market in Africa. So again, they employ only 5% of the workforce and produce 2.8% of GDP. That we have the 7th largest maize producer despite our periodic drought. So it is a real mark of efficiency, the maize market. Okay, so long run equilibrium in perfect competition. So I'm going to give you some examples first, and then we're going to look at sort of just wrapping up the lecture. And I just want to go into a little bit more detail on a few of these things. Okay, so the South African perfect competition market. So we've got the JSE agricultural markets. You've got maize futures. So here we were sitting at like 30%, which is a massive increase. Okay, went up to 9,273 Rand per ton on average. Okay, that was extremely concerning, and that's why it was integrated into your last assignment. Because, of course, we required government intervention at that point because that market specifically services the most vulnerable members of our society. So it did call for drastic intervention. Drastic intervention by government. But we've now since come out of it. There were droughts, there was electricity issues. So it was market conditions that did that to the price of wheat. So there are wheat contracts. Okay, so any of you interested in trading on the agricultural markets, you can adjust your entry and exit. Okay, you're a trader, so you're simply trading contracts. The Spaza township economy is about 178 billion is the approximate size of the market. Of course, these are just estimates. They make up approximately 24.9% of GDP. Okay. Easy entry, easy exit. That's essentially what stabilizes the prices in the Spaza shop market. So the long run outcomes in South Africa is that we have agricultural price standardization done by the JSE. We have a lot of small scale farmers. They're all price takers. Despite this fact that there are low barriers to entry and exit. We still sit with high unemployment rates, potentially because of the minimum wage rates are quite high. And of course, the South African Reserve Bank has major impacts. Okay, so the reason that the agricultural market is such a useful benchmark is because it's so perfectly competitive in the real world. In addition to that, most of our markets show some sort of oligopoly traits. So this is a perfect example. A great approach is using this as an example for the future. Retail. So the top 4 firms in South Africa, just as a comparative analysis, more oligopoly market is retail. So our top 4 firms hold 65% of the market share. All right, so we have looked at perfect competition in some details. Okay, so here we go. The economic indicators, okay, or implications. Price is determined by market supply and demand only. Individual traders can't influence the market. The market is completely transparent, which means that everyone has access to perfect information, and it's all about efficient resource allocation because you cannot influence the market share or by changing a product because all the products are homogeneous. You're simply trading contracts in this example. And price stability is achieved by this active participation of all of these, lots, many buyers and many sellers. On the other hand, you have monopolistic competition. Okay, so here you have a market structure with many sellers offering differentiated products. Okay, so there are thousands of spaza shops and they have product differentiation. So you go from one place to the other. Typically, they're located quite close to you. The product mix that they offer is also, similar but different. So there are low barriers to entry, very few legal requirements, if any, and they have some ability to price the priceable, to price the products in their market because they have the advantage of location. They often have strong brand relationships and a focus on producing brands that people recognize. Okay, so the other issue is we have over 100,000 spaza shops nationwide. They're part of a $1 trillion informal economy, and there are local and foreign-owned businesses in competition in South Africa. So why they show monopolistic competition is because of their differentiation using location. Product variety differs between shops, and they use customer loyalty to create relationships. So that it allows them a little bit of leniency on the pricing, and they have less elasticity impacting their businesses. Okay, so oligopolies in South Africa. This is where you have a few large firms dominating the market. We have a few examples. In fact, we have a lot of our industries are oligopoly. They have oligopolistic characteristics. Okay, so there are a few large firms, like in the retail sector, we have ShopRite, Pick n Pay, and Woolworths. Okay, they are all competing for the same market share. They have strategic interdependence between these firms, so they all take specific positions. They try not to overlap too much, and there are leading competitors in the market, and there are smaller entities. The Competition Commission monitors this concentration, so they don't allow them to expand too much so that they become complete monopolies. And they are under extreme scrutiny if they try to amalgamate or, merge with one another. Then, of course, you have Monopoly. Eskom is our perfect example there. We also have Transnet, which is rail and freight. So historically, with of course, telecom historically as well, because we had fixed line services until the market was liberated by technology and we all moved on to other telecommunication platforms. So it is when there is a single dominant provider, no substitutes, and they have complete price control. They are often regulated by government because no one else can enter the market. So the only thing that can control them is government. Okay, so 57% of South African sectors experience or didn't experience worsening market concentration, which is fantastic. Okay, so again, the perfect competition requirements, many buyers and sellers, homogeneous products, and perfect information. Also, freedom of entry and exit, and all your firms are price takers. Understanding the demand curve. So here, when in a perfect competition, you have perfectly elastic demand. So the firm faces a perfectly elastic demand. It's horizontal with the prevailing price. If a farmer charges above market price, there are no buyers and the market bypasses. Okay, so just a quick rehash of the marginal average cost curve step by step. So marginal costs are the additional cost of producing one additional unit. Here we have the actual formula. So here there's a change in cost over the change in quantity produced. So initially it decreases and then it starts to increase due to diminishing returns. Then you've got your average costs. That is your total cost divided by your quantity. It is a U-shaped curve. And again, it initially decreases and then it starts increasing. Your marginal cost curve intersects your average cost curve at its lowest point. So there are key relationships to remember. Here again, I will post all of these lecture slides so that you can have them to refer to, but your key relationships to remember is when your marginal cost curve is below your average cost is falling. When your marginal cost is above your average cost is rising. And then, of course, when your marginal cost curve equals your average costs have reached their optimal production point. Okay, so we have again just reiterated the different things that impact your costing. Okay, so key relationships, we're just going to look at the cost curves again, each of them. So here, in the blue line is your marginal cost curve. Your red line is your average total cost and your average variable cost in the green. Okay, so where these graphs actually intersect is quite important. So your marginal cost, where you see that blue line intersecting with the red line at point A, quantity produced, that is the minimum point of your average total costs. Okay, so when those 2 points meet. When your marginal cost equals your average variable cost at that intersection, that is where your blue line equals your green line here at point 3 quantity and a cost of about 5. That is where you've hit your minimum point of average variable cost. Your shutdown point is where your price is below your average variable cost. Okay. Okay. So in the last 10 minutes, we have an interactive case identifying these different types of products, okay, profits. So here we have on your y-axis the price cost curve, and here on your X-axis, you've got quantity in tons. So this is a graph of the 2021 export boom season. Okay, so it's specifically maize farmers. So what did they experience in the scenario during the 2021 export boom? Maize prices reached 3,800 per ton. So this farmer produces at the quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So based on this diagram, is the farmer making an economic profit, a normal profit, or an economic loss? Okay, so give that some thought. This would be the type of scenario that you could be presented with during the exam. So it's worthwhile looking into, and I'll give you the answer to this question in our next lecture. So again, just a tip in the right direction of what to look for. If your price exceeds your average total cost in the green line, okay, your price obviously is in the red. So when your price exceeds your average total cost, you are reaching economic profit. When your price dips below your average total cost, you are hitting economic loss. But in a scenario where you are at average total cost is equal to your price, you are achieving a normal profit. Okay, that means that you are carrying no additional expenses and you're not making any extraordinary profits. Okay, you are covering all of your costs with the products that you are already producing. Okay, so what you'll see in this diagram is that your marginal cost curve initially decreases. Why is that? Each additional unit, we're becoming more efficient at producing. So here, up until we get to 0.5, we are still reducing the cost of production by producing an additional unit. But at the quantity 0.6, we are now producing at a point that we are actually increasing costs disproportionately. So here we can continue to produce at this level all the way up until the point where price starts to fall below your average total cost, because at that point you start dipping into economic loss territory. So the answer here would be at 3,800 per ton. What was this farmer producing at? At what point was his marginal cost equaling his marginal revenue? What is his marginal revenue in this scenario? His price. So at which point did the marginal revenue and marginal cost meet? Okay, it's around between 8 and 9 tons. Okay, guys, with that, I think I'm going to close off tonight's lecture. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm always here to help. If you have any questions regarding ICE, please drop me an email. I will send you out any notifications of anything you need to take note of. But for now, everyone's doing great. You will have all your marks published, and I wish you all the best for the upcoming summatives. Please drop me a line if you need any direct questions or any additional resources. I'm happy to create them for you. But all the best, guys. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.